We have half an hour, so I'm going to try to do my best to make sure we don't go over time. And I understand that there is a Twitter feed that's going to be shown on that screen. And if there are questions that our audience have, please feel free to tweet. Okay? And so, Ehsan, your lab has been, I'll start off with you. Your lab has been working for the last few years, working with different materials, experimenting materials and methods. So what do you think are the key opportunities for additive manufacturing for Canada specifically?
I think the most important opportunities for Canada is in biomedical area and also aerospace. I have been working with Mount Sinai Hospital over the last 5-6 years, and we have developed 3D printing technology for biodegradable materials. In fact, the material of bionic, material that could be implanted, but after a while, that scaffold would be dissolved. What remains is natural bone and cartilage. I think a lot of opportunities here, given the fact that the biological idea has been raised by Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm working with very high caliber people in this hospital. On top of that, aerospace, given the fact that we have some major companies in Quebec specifically, I think for Canada, adoption of 3D printing or additive manufacturing to aerospace industry in Quebec is so important and bring a lot of opportunities for Canada.
Okay. Matt, I want to ask you, you see that there's a huge interest in market for the advanced robotics. What do you think are the most exciting societal impacts of advanced robotics and autonomous vehicles?
So for autonomous vehicles, the statistics, I recall something like 750 hours the average American spends in their car commuting to and from work and driving to family vacations. That's 750 hours of regained time, regained productivity that you can be doing something else. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of impact, that's a major one right there. But it also has the added benefits of statistically there should be fewer accidents, and so roadside casualties, traffic-related injuries should all decrease as well, which has impacts then into the healthcare systems and costs for insurance and so forth. So driverless cars in and of themselves have a tremendous amount of impact. So I would focus on driverless cars and the impact that it stands to provide.
Over the years, you find that the increasingly more use of advanced unmanned vehicles for search and rescue. You have any comment about that? Yeah.
Search and rescue is an interesting one.
Yeah.
We had a big spike in interest in search and rescue robotics after the event at Fukushima, and so that's really brought search and rescue robots into the limelight. And there's a few projects that we've been involved in where the concept of search and rescue is interesting because it's a disaster site, so you don't really know what you're going to be encountering when you go there. Fukushima is a great example where the radiation levels were unknown, and so sending people and just the ability for people to respond is significantly impeded. Being able to deploy a swarm of robots, whether it's all aerial robots or some ground or some combination of all, to better assess, more rapidly assess the situation, let alone being able to potentially identify survivors sooner. Search and rescue is a very interesting application, but I think short term, the role of robotics in search and rescue will be more assessing the environment, not acting on it. So there's a way to go before a robot will actually be able to extract someone from a disaster area.
Ehsan, let me ask you this one. You've talked about the tremendous opportunity for additive manufacturing in your presentation, but what are the costs for taking these technologies to market? Then can a company that's currently doing manufacturing pick up this technology and implement it easily? What are the entry barriers for them to do so?
It depends. In some of the market areas, like, for example, film industry or jewelry and clothes I think they can actually get and use 3D printing very easily. The market barrier is not that much. That would be just the barrier of understanding the technology, understanding how to work with 3D printers, understanding how to actually move from one material to other materials. For some industry, again, 3D printing still is so expensive. When we talk about specifically aerospace, we are talking about metal additive manufacturing, and typically metal additive manufacturing machines so expensive. We are talking about $500,000 to even $2-3 million, so on and so forth. However, it has created a lot of motivations among industry. As I told you, General Electric has announced that more than 100,000 parts of an airplane would be 3D printed by 2020. General Electric recently purchased a company that has more than 35 metal 3D printers. We are talking about $30 to $50 million capital investment. And they are very, very vigorously working on this area to bring it to the market in a few years ahead. Again, the answer here is it depends. We need to actually understand the quality of materials, the quality of products, and also we need to actually look at the market size.
Great. So this one's for you, Matt, but Ehsan, you can jump in.
Sure.
A long question. Does the combination of additive manufacturing techniques and new sensing technologies and advanced robotics signal an inflection point in artificial intelligence?
Interesting. So I think
I'm just glad you guys get those
yeah,
questions.
I'd say it enables artificial intelligence in new manifestations.
Cyborgs,
Well, if you look
are
at
they real?
yeah, no. So 3D printers, for example, additive manufacturing, and sensing technologies. The developments that have been happening in additive manufacturing have been getting us closer and closer to desktop 3D printing. In order to have desktop 3D printing, there needs to be a level of intelligence on board to correct for errors. There's a lot more errors that a human programmer can make in commanding to develop some certain part that you can't get when you're typing in Word and asking to print on a page. And so I don't think we've fully explored artificial intelligence with respect to additive manufacturing just yet, but it's certainly enabling new platforms for deployment and experimentation of artificial intelligence. I think before we can get there, though, the platforms need to become not only stable but readily accessible in the hands of people who are going to innovate and experiment and deploy these new manifestations of artificial intelligence. Sensors as well are improving. So there's the MakerBot 3D printer. They were bought by Stratasys, a major player in additive manufacturing for industrial applications, and they released a scanner that's also a desktop device, and you put your whatever widget it is that you want to get printed, and it uses the same sensors that were made low cost and readily available through Microsoft's Xbox platform, the Kinect. So it uses 3D scanners. It's got a little turntable that spins the object, creates the 3D model, and then sends it over to their other device, the 3D printer, and you can print it. So put whatever you want as long as it fits and it prints. So sensors are also enabling additive manufacturing and will provide a new set of eyes for artificial intelligence.
Well,
Ehsan, you have anything
I
to
heard
add?
about a story in one of the universities in the state. People are working on a 3D printer that can replicate itself. If you have some advanced robotics and a 3D printer, you have some sort of population problem.
Very interesting. So with all the news we have surrounding about drones and automation of workflow, should we be concerned that advanced robotics and automation will eliminate meaningful work for humans? I will let
Sure.
Matt and then Ehsan.
I love that question because it always comes up, and it's as if robotics is the first time this has ever been an issue. But the concept of technological unemployment, which is the term that is more broadly applied, is not new at all. Any technological innovation creates technological unemployment. Old jobs become obsolete, new jobs get created. There's a displacement that happens. A better way of angling that question is, what country, what city is going to lead that change? Where are those new jobs going to be created? Because jobs will be made obsolete. Someone is going to do this innovation. It will happen. Innovation isn't going to stop. And so we should not be opposed to technological innovation in the area of additive manufacturing and advanced robotics. We should embrace it, and we should make sure that it happens here so that when these billion-dollar industries are created, we benefit from it.
I totally agree with Matt. I think we would have more job opportunities if 3D printing and advanced robotics come into the story. Again, definitely there is no doubt that some of the job mandates would be changed. We may actually need less machining technicians. We may actually need less casting technicians, but definitely we need more 3D printing technicians. On top of that, I believe 3D printing would change the culture of mass production to the culture of low-volume customized productions. And given the fact that we would have these local communities customizing or adopting 3D printing to their areas, I think job opportunities would be more and more in 5-10 years from now.
So do you agree, Helge?
I have a much less optimistic picture in my head, at least for the short term. I don't think jobs that get removed by technologies are coming back. I think it's the political correct thing to say that, oh yeah, all these like machinists disappear, and then, but an equal number of much better paid engineering jobs will be created for these people to design 3D printed object. And yet, since the beginning of mankind, that hasn't been true. What really happens is technology replaces the human worker, and that translates into less hours worked per week. The problem is that that's, in the long run, a good thing, but in the short term, scary, right? That means people get out of a job, and the 40-hour work week, we have some problem. We get these sort of part-time employment situations, and it creates all this scary stuff socially in the sort of decade scale, even though on the century scale it works well, because of course on the century scale, there's nothing magic about a 40-hour work week. It's just a random construct that we picked up in World War II era, right? Before that it was the 60-hour work week, and 50 years before that was the 80-hour work week, and so forth and so forth. So I actually have no fear whatsoever of the 20-hour work week. I look forward to it, in fact. The problem is it won't be people like me and you that have the 20-hour work, will be the bulk of the population. And the handful of people that actually still invent stuff will have to work even harder. The problem is we have to find a way to deal with the social upheaval that comes with that, right? So initiatives like in Switzerland of basic income and so forth are mechanisms to try to buffer for that, because it certainly is going to be painful when that happens. But then it was painful in the Industrial Revolution too.
So certainly the social scientists should study that.
Well, there is a lot of study. If you read about this field, basically what happens in the century scale is that people, through automation, lose jobs. So they have less time that they work, which means they have more time to do other stuff. And early on, the other stuff is always sort of scary, and people look at it and go, oh, they're just going to all go on Facebook and waste their time away. But if you look at it in the long run, that other stuff elevates society, right? The printing press wasn't invented because Gutenberg had a good idea. The printing press came into existence because peasants were able to go through the invention of the plow, the horse-drawn plow, were able to get off the fields an hour earlier. Coming home from the fields an hour earlier meant that they still had daylight when they finished their workday. That meant there was a market for the printed word, right? And we look back at this a few centuries later and go, hey, everybody can read, or almost everybody. That's kind of useful, right? That came out of surplus time. And I think the same thing will happen. I don't know what it's going to happen, but as we get those extra hours freed up in our current economy, people will eventually put it to some global use. We just don't understand what that is yet, and that's a bit scary.
Great. We have a question on the live feed. What can be said about the importance of hardware-software integration? So who would like to take that?
I'll give it a shot because I
Okay.
get this question a lot. When people visit our operation, a lot of times I have first comers come in and goes, "Oh, I've heard you're a hardware company," and most of them still say that was like an expression in their face that's like, "I heard you kill babies." And what we tell them is, half of our companies are hardware companies and half of our companies are software companies, but it actually means that 3/4 of our people are software engineers, because there is no such thing anymore as a true hardware company, right? Software is an integrated component of any hardware. All hardware is smart. Even the 3D printer is smart enough to print itself. So if you don't understand that, if you don't do the two together, you're going to be a dead company sometime in this decade.
Absolutely. The answer is yes, right?
Yes.
Okay. So who wants to take this? Are we on the cusp of a hardware revolution, both personally and industrially?
I'd say it's cycling back. I think it took a bit of a vacation for a little while as computers became prevalent for personal computing, and then the internet came online. The ability to build very rapidly, very profitable businesses distracted all of the entrepreneurs. That's what they focused on. The barriers to entry were very low. The costs to enter was a computer in your time if you understood a programming language. And so that has become a very, very crowded market, and the success rates are becoming increasingly low, and the types of businesses that are emerging are becoming increasingly abstract in terms of the actual economic benefit that they offer. And so now we see successes and data points of companies that are manufacturing physical goods and delivering tangible benefit. And because of all of the advances in software and everything that predated what we are experiencing right now, the costs to enter hardware have come down. There are programs in place and incubators and ecosystems emerging where the cost to get that first prototype has decreased. I would attribute primarily to that the crowdfunding revolution, the ability to test the market and validate the market prior to actually investing in all of your tooling is an exceptional tool, especially for consumer electronics or consumer goods.
So do you think we are competitive internationally in these emerging areas? I'll ask Matt and then Helge.
Picking on me.
Yeah.
I think, relative to the size of the Canadian market, we punch well above our weight class,
Okay.
so to speak. There are some really potent hardware companies that have come out of Canada and in particular this region. So I think we're doing quite well, but obviously we could do a lot more.
Helge?
Well, economic development is not about fairness, it's about unfairness, right? We want to have an unfair share of companies, an unfair share of entrepreneurs. And so in that sense, we can never have enough. But I would agree with Matt that to some extent, because the sort of early software jump has led a whole bunch of people in the first tier regions astray, if you want, has led them into these domains that are now becoming a little bit difficult to differentiate yourself in. The backwaters, like Canada for a while, have been able to sort of muddle along and build these kind of next generation companies. It's no surprise that the vast majority of the, for example, robotic companies that were mentioned in the earlier talks, you mentioned a couple of acquisitions, none of them are Silicon Valley companies, right? They're all in the sort of second tier, quotation mark, cities that maybe didn't spawn a Facebook, but instead put their energy building an advanced robotic company that's now, a billion-dollar enterprise.
Okay. So we don't have much time left. Last question. So Helge, you can ask this. I can answer this one. How does the Canadian government support the development, your company? Can they do better?
Ooh, that's a very loaded question. That gentleman, I think, has tenure. That's a safer person to ask.
Yeah.
No, kidding aside,
Yeah.
there's obviously a lot of stuff that the Canadian government does. There's a lot of stuff that the Canadian government does right. There's some things that they do wrong. the key, whenever one of those big changes, one of those big waves are coming, the key is to do two things. One is to create conditions for the wave to continue to grow, right? And so in this case, we've seen a lot of efforts to streamline the shred tax credits. We've seen some efforts to streamline incubation funding and so forth. And I think that's all healthy. You just have to actually make sure that you spend your day talking to the people who are riding the wave and not the people who just rode the wave, right? Because the guys who made it up the curve and run hundreds of millions or billion-dollar companies, they're great people to talk to, but at the same time, their conditions for them to start the next business are now radically different than, I think Karamdeep talked about Salesforce being started with $6 million out of pocket, right? That's the wrong guy to ask about what it takes to start a company, right? Even though it's a good story. And then, of course, the second thing government has to do is, when they enable the condition to start the wave, is to kind of get out of the way of the wave. I do think absolutely the best thing that will happen for the Canadian ecosystem when it comes to venture financing is that it will become a private industry rather than a government-sponsored industry. That we still have a long way to go for that, but Silicon Valley and other hotspot regions have made that shift. They've made that shift for the better to become performance-based operations rather than kind of economic development-based operations, which will never, well, by definition, perform at that same level.
Great. I thought, yes, it seems to run out of time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was very interesting, and thank you for presenting today. Yeah.
Thank you.